Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. December 15 this year marks 10 years since the enforced disappearance of Laos civil society leader, also our colleague, mentor, and friend, Sombath Somphone. Despite repeated calls by Shaman here, his wife, and many others on the Lao government to tell us about his fate and whereabouts. We haven't gotten any updates so far. The Lao authorities have denied any involvement in the incident, despite clear videotape evidence that someone was taken away from a busy street in Vientiane. Sombath invented a development model unique to Laos that is ecologically sustainable and economically, culturally, and spiritually well balanced, with overall aim, ultimate goal of well-being and happiness. His work and his organization inspired many of us, especially young people, and earned him and his organization much respect and recognition inside and outside Laos. Every year for the past 10 years, we have been organizing various activities and conferences and meetings to mark Sombath's disappearance in Bangkok and everywhere, elsewhere, to raise his case and also similar other human rights violations in the region and elsewhere. However, because of the outbreak of COVID-19, such activities, particularly in face-to-face fashion, have been quite difficult. However, recently, the borders of many countries are opening up. So this year, we are commemorating again Sombath's disappearance through a series of events under the umbrella theme of "We shall not forget." And we'll see a series of events in the coming 2 weeks and beyond. This hybrid event, where you are both in person and online, is one of the first events in the series, and it's entitled Honoring the Legacy of Sombath Somphone. And this event is co-organized by Focus on the Global South, Asia-Europe People's Forum, Embassy of the Netherlands in Thailand, and Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute. In the coming few hours, we'll try to highlight how the ideas and approaches that Sombath practiced and advocated for are especially relevant to the present situations of economic slump, accelerating climate change, increasing food security, insecurity, and the continuing public health threats such as COVID-19, and also allowing people, sisters and brothers and friends from different time zones and places to join. It is also worth noting that today, December 2nd, is Lao National Day, to mark the establishment of Lao PDR back in 1975. And I say this because Sombath is known to be a son of Laos and is always proud to be a Laotian. It's also worth mentioning that December 10th is World Human Rights Day for apparent reasons. My name is Toshi and I'll be moderating today's event. Are we okay? Okay, all right. Today, we are extremely lucky and honored by the presence of ambassador of the Dutch Embassy in Thailand. Let me introduce His Excellency Remco. He asked me to, he told me to call him just Remco, so I'll follow his advice. And His Excellency Remco, and he'll be giving us opening remarks as one of the co-organizers. So, Remco, please.
Good morning. My family name is very complicated. I have a written speech, so I will take the speech. But let me first say that I'm honored to be here today on this occasion. I think it's very important to commemorate enforced disappearances, but to take time to do that, to attract attention to it. So good morning, everybody, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be invited by Focus on the Global South, Asia Europe People's Forum and Social Research Institute of Chulalongkorn to be part of this meaningful event today to honor the legacy of Sombath Somphone, who has sadly been missing here for 10 years. And please allow me to convey my condolences to and sympathy mostly to you, Shalmali, for this immeasurable grief for the past 10 years. I think most of us have a strong conviction that enforced disappearance is a remorseless crime. It's both a crime, both remorseless. And there are many reasons why we believe this is a remorseless crime, but to put it very bluntly, it's for the people who stay behind, saying goodbye is already, to people that we know that are leaving is already very difficult. But saying, not being able to say goodbye to a person, to a loved one, to a family member, is something that we cannot fathom the effect that it has on you. And I know that there are people in this room, more than one people in this room that have been affected by enforced disappearances. So I think it's extremely important to underline that this is heartbreaking, and that this is a crime, and that it is devastating for the people that are being affected. But the lack of knowledge, what has happened to loved ones, is something that people can very hardly endure, and that many people in the world, in the region, in Laos, but also in Thailand, have to face. It's frequently used as a strategy. It's a strategy to impose fear, and as a strategy to enforce certain developments in society. And we do believe internationally that this is a crime. And that the feeling of insecurity generated is not only limited to the people that are directly affected, the family members, but it has a big impact on society as well. So having said that, I think strongly believe that Sombath's disappearance is also a defeat to the international human rights community. Also a defeat to sustainable development because of his work that he did on sustainable development. And his approach to provide a framework for development and education that combines indigenous wisdom, traditional knowledge, cultural values appropriate to the local area with scientific practices is a concept that we all think is essential for development. And I think he was leading in that. I'm also looking forward to be hearing more from Kearrin and his fellow human rights defenders who will elaborate more on his inspirational contribution to both a stronger civil society and to social development of civil society in Laos, but also in the region. And what can I do as a Dutch ambassador? Not much, unfortunately, but what I can do, we do, not only as a Dutch ambassador, but also as a Dutch embassy and as the international community. I think we should stand here and in front of you as a message of solidarity, and that we should also raise the issue as often as we can in appropriate form. So we're doing that. So the systemic practice of enforced disappearance, we strongly believe, is a crime against humanity as defined in applicable international law, and the offense should be made punishable in every country in the world. And let me reiterate that we strongly believe that all cases of enforced disappearance in Laos, in the region and in the world, be effectively investigated in accordance with international standards, and that the perpetrators be identified and prosecuted, and that the families are receiving the effective remedy and full reparation. I would like to encourage Laos to follow the footsteps of Thailand in adopting a law to address torture and enforced disappearances. I am aware of how challenging this process was in Thailand. It took more than 10 years. I think it took 13 years in Thailand to start work on the law and to have the law passed. And I believe that Thai King has signed the law recently, and that the law will be coming to effect early next year. So we all want Laos to follow that example. It will not be easy in Laos. I know it will not be easy. But the Netherlands and the EU and the international community will be supportive of democracy to enforce and to develop such a law if we can. So I would like to wish you all well on the path of human rights protection together and in support of one another, be it in working on civil society, governmental politics, knowing that all of us have to protect and be protectors. Let us stand strong and stay together in solidarity. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much for your work on this productive case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Remco, for your encouragement and support. Great. Okay, there are perhaps two groups of people in this room and also online. One group is a group of people who know Sombath personally and his work, who are eager to speak. I know quite a few people in the audience. And also, the other group is probably a group of people who don't really know Sombath or his work, but who are eager to learn and eager to ask questions. So I would like to take this opportunity to jump into the discussion part. Okay. However, to kickstart our discussion, I would like to bring together 4 speakers to make short presentations on ideas, approaches, and values that are dear to Sombath's heart. Okay. And each speaker will be speaking based on the designated topic. So I'd like to invite Peter. Can you come to the front? Okay, yeah. I'll introduce you more formally here. And Angkhana, can you please? And Ajahn, please. Okay, so let me more or less formally introduce, and also we have one speaker online. Okay. Anyway, let me introduce them a bit more formally. Closer to me is Rosset, Professor of Agroecology, ECOSUR Advanced Studies Institute in Mexico, right? And also, currently visiting scholar at Toronto University Social Research Institute. So this is Peter. And then we have Angkhana Neelaphaijit, former Human Rights Commissioner from Thailand, and also a family victim of the enforced disappearance. Thank you for joining us. And on your left is Ajahn Eakpant Pindavanija from Social Research Institute, Chulalongkorn University. Okay. And we also have Kearrin. Kearrin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Thank you for joining us. And that's Kearrin Sims, Senior Lecturer at Development Studies, James Cook University, Australia. He's happy joining us from Australia. All right. So, what we'll do? Are you hearing us, Kearrin? Kearrin?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
I can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay. So, what we'll do is we'll have 2 rounds of speakers. In the first round, each speaker will be given more or less 10 minutes. Let's make it shorter than 10 minutes. And each speaker will be speaking on a specific topic. And after that, I'll just open the floor to the audience here and also online. And those who are joining us online, if you want to speak up during the discussion time, you can turn on your video and microphone if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, you can also write in comments in the chat box, and our assistant will pick up and read your questions or comments aloud. But I must say that in the interest of time, we may not be able to entertain all the comments and questions, and if that happens, my deep apologies in advance. But we'll try to pick up as many questions and comments as possible online as well. Okay. And after that, after discussion, I'm going to give the speakers a second round, maybe up to 3 minutes, and they can react, they can add, or they can link various topics as well. And after all that, I will invite Kearrin, who is well familiar with the values and all the works of Sombath, and she will try to connect many issues, if not all of them, to give us some sort of conclusions. And that's the format for today. Okay? And I'm really looking forward to lively discussion. Oh, and we also have Thai English simultaneous interpretation. So maybe those who speak up can be a bit mindful about interpretation. Please speak clearly and slowly if you can, so that interpretation can be done. Yeah. Shalmali, you have something to say? Oh, okay. So let me start with Angkhana, and you'll be the first speaker, and you'll be speaking about Sombath and his work within the context of human rights, human rights violation, and emphasis. So please.
Thank you very much, Toshi, and good morning, Your Excellency, colleagues and friends. I'm really happy to be together with you and friends of Sombath Somphone once again, and this year is very important moment as it is the 10th anniversary that we used to be together since the first moment, and now every one of us still here again to support Kearrin and under the face of Disappearances. Today I will speak about Sombath legacy and will focus on the human rights and development. As you know that today countries in the world accepted the Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs as the parameters in all aspects of development, including the eradication, impoverishment and hunger, achievement of civil equality, access to resources, education, information, human rights and justice. Undeniable, access to human rights and justice is very important to human dignity and value, and it is indispensable in all aspects of development. Human rights ensure that voices of all people will be heard and respected. In democratic countries, this enhances freedom of people and rights to with the protection from the law and the absence of transparent monitoring mechanism, especially the independence of judiciary. In such environment, people can access to the policy and decision making by the government, formally, particularly the policy that affect large number of people and communities. All of these are so important for sustainable development based on the respect of value and dignity of all human beings. Although many countries in Asia claim that they are democratic countries, but the rights, freedom, and civil space of people are still really limited. On 16 June 2011, the United Human Rights Council endorsed the guiding principle on business and human rights, and in its resolution 17/4, the UN guiding principle encompasses 3 pillars, outlining how state and business should implement the framework. First, state existing obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights and fundamental freedom. Second, the role of business enterprise as specialized organs of society, performing specialized functions required to comply with all applicable laws to respect human rights. And the need for rights and obligation to be met to appropriate and effective remedies when breaches. This guiding principle applies to all states and to all business enterprises, both transnational and others, regardless of their size, sector, location, ownership, and structure. In terms of access to remedy, like which case, this time-bound issue, for example, the investment of Thai companies or development activities in different countries. I would like to show you some example, the work of the former Human Rights Commissioner. The cases of Cambodia and Myanmar during 2016-2017, Human Rights Commission played the vital roles of non-judiciary functions, bridging the gap of making the investigation with fact-finding until finalizing the official and high-quality evidence-based investigation report with policy recommendations and then submitted them to the relevant government authorities and parties, including plaintiffs. And the cabinet, how the companies show the cabinet that how the company damages the resources and net pollution in different countries. There are at least 12 Thai-bound investments documented with policy monitoring while the Human Rights Commission investigated 6 cases, covering those conducted in Cambodia. For example, the sugarcane land concession, and Myanmar, the economic zone mining operations, and allows the power generation with land construction. The Thai cabinet included 2 comprehensive fact-finding reports of Thai sugarcane communities in Cambodia and Thai industry with megaprojects in Hawaii, Myanmar, funded by the Human Rights Commission. Adopted the resolution in 2016 and 2017 to cover spectrum of efforts made and being made from multi-sectoral actors, especially the business and investors. These 2 resolutions highlight the extraterritorial obligation and Thai outbound investment with interpreting the UN guiding principle and on business and human rights. Anyhow, the gap analysis has been conducted under the various baseline assessment with policy made and challenges found, especially for remedy, measure and binding obligations. Last year, the Cambodia people who affected by the sugar company with the company Thailand South to Sombath Somphone Court asking for judicial remedy. And now the case still in the court during the COVID-19. The case related, but we hope that today the court will continue the investigation of the damage of the Cambodian people who are affected by the sugar company. Another example, the harm situation could be addressed apart from the extrajudicial obligation, Thai outbound investment, with the case, with the commission action taken, for example, the mining operation from the year 2005 until now, there were more than 48 complaints filed to Human Rights Commission within 5 concerns. For example, the participation of local people, health and surroundings, and land rights remedies. Second thing I would like to highlight is about the community rights defenders. There's a lot of community rights defenders in ASEAN reported the facing of judicial harassment. Some were open attack, torture, and enforced disappearances. While there are abuses and stress with impunity and huge delay of justice, and Sombath Somphone is one among these victims. Some community leaders faces judicial harassment or the strategic litigation against public participation to silencing the rights defenders and communities. All of these are the situation of human rights and development, not only in Thailand but in ASEAN as well. And I think that even though Thailand has a national action plan on business and human rights, and one of the 4 priorities is the extraterritorial violation, but the protection of the rights of the people of neighboring countries is still really delayed and not implemented yet. And I stop here and I welcome your question and comments later. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Angkhana, for substantiating a clear connection between human rights and sustainable development, which was central in Sombath's work through many cases that have happened and that are ongoing in not just in Thailand but in the entire region. Thank you very much. Can I move to Peter? And your topic is apparently agroecology.
Thank you very much. It's of course a great honor to be here. I thank very much the organizers. Thank you to the moderator, my illustrious fellow members of the panel, Your Excellency, and everybody else who's here and connected. I'm going to deviate very slightly from my script because I feel it's important to say, as somebody from Mexico, that we understand very well the issue of forced disappearance. I believe Mexico perhaps is #1 in the world with a registered 120,000 forced disappearances in the so-called war on drugs, which conveniently displaces rural people from the very territories that are coveted by the mining industry, the large-scale monoculture industry, as we heard from the former speaker. And in particular, in next year on September 24th, will mark the 10th anniversary of the disappearance of the 43 rural pedagogy students in Ayotzinapa, Mexico, who, like Sombath, has come to symbolize the larger issue of forced disappearance here in Laos and in Southeast Asia. The 43 students of Ayotzinapa have come to symbolize forced disappearances to enforce the dominant development model. And in Mexico, many times in civil society meetings, we leave 43 empty chairs in every meeting. And everybody, people count off 1 to 43 at the beginning of the meeting, and then we all say, "Fue el Estado," it was the state. because the state in these cases never acknowledges responsibility, but we know who is really enforcing the development model. So I bring deep solidarity from the Mexican people for the cases of forced disappearance here in Southeast Asia. And I think many of the problems behind forced disappearance are the same. And so it's a global struggle. Now, in this sense, the forced disappearance to enforce a development model, a dominant capitalist neoliberal development model, 20 years, more or less 20 years ago when I was in Laos and shared spaces with Sombath, I remember that the concerns were very similar. I remember the concern about the forced displacement of traditional people from sloping land, enforcing their relocation into conventional large-scale monoculture. I remember the disappearance of the forest that people depended on for forage foodstuff. I remember that Sombath had the integrated rice scheme, integrated rice model, which is let's say, a systematization of traditional farmer, peasant knowledge in an agroecological way, which brings me to the topic of agroecology. Agroecology is a science, on the one hand, that is based on accumulated traditional peasant and farmer knowledge around the world over millennia. It's also the farming practices that allow people to remain in rural areas, farm in harmony with Mother Earth, and produce healthy food. And it's also part of a global social movement to change our food system. And our food system is one of the elements in enforcing this development model, displacing people. The food system is large-scale monoculture and forest clearing for large-scale monoculture, and the industrial production of livestock and forest clearing for livestock feed, and in many cases by important companies based in this region of the world, are amongst the leading causes of deforestation, of greenhouse gas emission, of emerging human diseases, whether we're talking about E. coli and salmonella from industrial meat, or we're talking about swine flu and avian flu that come from industrial confined animal production of birds and pigs, or whether we're talking about the COVID comorbidity factors, that people who died from COVID were more likely to have food system, bad diet, processed food induced ailments like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, and most of the currently accepted scientific hypotheses around the origins of COVID located somewhere in this nexus of confined animal production and forest clearing for livestock feed, or the political and scientific interests of the companies that engage in those practices. So the food system is related to most of the crises, the civilizatory and planetary crises that humanity faces today, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about emergent diseases, the probability that there will be more and more pandemics unless we radically change the food system, the social crisis, land grabbing, displacement of traditional people and peasant people from rural areas for large dams, for large scale monoculture, for mining, for infrastructure development. And so it's urgent. And in addition to being an academic, I've also spent many years as part of the team of La Via Campesina International, which is the global movement of peasants, small farmers, indigenous people, and farm workers around the world. And we very strongly believe that we need an alternative model for how we organize food and farming in the world. We call the larger paradigm, alternative paradigm, food sovereignty, which means relocalizing food production, doing it ecologically, and putting peasants and small farmers in charge of producing food. And one of the aspects of food sovereignty is agroecology. And this, of course, brings us back to the work of Sombath in terms of the integrated rice model, which is an agroecological model for producing rice sustainably and ecologically by peasant farmers based on accumulated knowledge and the systematizing of traditional farming practices and the ecological principles that underlie their sustainability. There are many aspects of agroecology, many applications around the world that would be very important. One of the issues that is important in Laos, in Thailand, and in Mexico, where I live, is the long war against shifting cultivators or rotational agriculture on slopes and in forests, where governments accuse small farmers and peasants of cutting the forest, of burning the forest, of causing particulate matter pollution, when in fact the reality is it's the expansion of monoculture and mining that's cutting the forest. In the case of Southeast Asia, monoculture for livestock feed. And we're losing one of the most long-term sustainable agroecologically sound farming systems, rotational farming or shifting cultivation, which is the management of forest and agriculture together by the traditional knowledge of traditional people. Where I come from in Mexico, the Mesoamerican forests, now it's been scientifically proven that they have been managed sustainably for 8,000 to 10,000 years by traditional people with no decline in yield, no decline in productivity, no decline in forest cover, and in fact that they sustained a larger population density in the forested areas before the conquest by Europeans than exists today. Yet they're being displaced by this development model that's enforcing disappearances in Mexico, that enforced the disappearance of our comrade Sombath and so many other community rights defenders around the world. So on the one hand, no to forced disappearance. In the case of Sombath, in the case of the 43 students in Mexico, it was the state, and we have to hold the state in every country responsible for what happens. And yes, we have alternatives, and Sombath was somebody who was showing those alternatives, and the global peasant movement is also struggling to build those same alternatives. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for connecting so many dots, including your experiences of working with Sombath. And I must say it's extremely disturbing and also disheartening to hear about these 43 cases of students who experienced enforced disappearance. Okay, let's move on to our guest online. Kearrin, thank you for waiting. Are you ready? Can you hear us? Wait a minute.
I just lost the audio from the room.
Okay, can you, hello? We can hear you, but can you hear us? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you again.
Okay, good. And we can hear you and we can see you on the big screen. Okay, so I think we are all set. And I understand that you've been looking at Sombath's work, and today you're sharing your views within the theme of joyful learning. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So you've got your 10 minutes, please.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, Toshi, and thank you to Shalmali for the invitation to speak today. Thank you for those convening, Focus on the Global South, the Asian Europe Business Forum, the Embassy of the Netherlands, and Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute. I also wanted to thank those involved in establishing and maintaining the Sombath.org website, because it's a really useful repository of Sombath ideas, and those of you who are not overly familiar with his work, it's a really good place to have a look at some of the things that, some of the wonderful things that he did. So there are a number of people in attendance today who know Sombath's work much better than I. hopefully I can still make a worthwhile contribution. And rather than speak on matters of forced disappearance, what I'd like to discuss, as Toshi mentioned, is Sombath's work around joyful learning, and more broadly than that, his twin commitments around education's role in development and working with young people. So as part of my own research, I've commenced a new applied project around service learning. Service learning broadly is learning programs where students are taken out of the classroom to be involved in some sort of community projects or conservation projects. It's a sector that's faced a lot of valid criticism, and through my research what I'm hoping to do is to develop some new sectoral approaches which are more attentive to things like social equity and social justice. And in doing that, I've been engaging with Sombath's insights around learning. And in some ways, I'm also trying to carry forward his ambitions to bring education for sustainable development and more holistic forms of education into our mainstream education systems. So I think a number of you would be familiar with the model that Sombath developed for sustainable development, which he represented pictorially in the form of a house with 4 pillars. In this model, good governance and quality education serve as the foundation for achieving what he termed genuine national happiness. And this is a term that borrows, of course, on Bhutan's gross national happiness concept. So Sombath saw education and development as mutually reinforcing, and indeed his view was that the 4 pillars representing the different dimensions of development within this model, and those pillars were of nature, culture, economy, and the heart and head, must be anchored in and be part of the education process. In addition to this model for genuine national happiness, Sombath also developed a model for what he called joyful learning, and again he depicted it using the same 4-pillared house-like structure with the same 4 pillars of nature, culture, economy and the heart head, but with quality schooling and good youth leadership and participation as the foundation of the model. And I'm going to try to add both of these models to the chat after this short presentation for those of you who haven't seen them. But you can also access them via the resources on the sombath.org website. So youth leadership and participation were really valued by Sombath, and he emphasised the importance of working with young people and the power of active youth citizenship, actually as one of the learnings of his career. He discovered that he could achieve, or often achieve much more by working with youth than he could sometimes by working with older people in positions of power. That insight is one of the things that's encouraging me actually to take on this project that I'm currently working on. And so I want to discuss a few of Sombath's comments around youth and young people and development. And he said, to quote, "Children and young people are at the centre of the model of sustainable development." He said that we need to unleash the potential of children and youth to take a greater role and responsibility in both education and development. And he said that one way to get around what he described as this boom and bust model of development, and of course, for those of us that are here that follow development in Laos, it's very much in one of these bust moments at present. He said we need to listen to and include young people more so that they're at the centre of education and that they're the central client of our development models. So it wasn't just education that Sombath saw as important to development, but a model of development where the ideas, the participation, the leadership of young people within education is also valued. And we see this in the various initiatives that he set up over the course of his career, things like youth-led radio stations, for example. When working with young people, Sombath also really valued experiential learning. So this is hands-on, activity-based learning beyond the classroom. This could be in conservation, growing production of food, composting, a range of other activities, holistic-oriented learning programs which he established, and in which he always encouraged community engagement, engagement of parents and community leaders. So experiential learning is one of the ways in which Sombath sought to make schooling and education more joyful. Another way in which he sought to do education differently to most mainstream schooling, why was by focusing on what we might call socio-emotional learning, or what he described as learning of the heart and head. And this, as I mentioned, is one of the 4 pillars of joyful learning. So Sombath felt that, and I'm quoting him again here, that the dominant development models that we see today tend to underemphasise the heart, which he says is the spiritual or the psychosocial well-being of people, and tend to overemphasise the material aspects of life. And of course he said this almost 15, 20 years ago, and still remains very pertinent today. He also felt that education should be a way of promoting compassion and tolerance in society. And perhaps to some of us this seems like an obvious thing to say, perhaps what we might call a simple truth. But it's important to remember that this kind of learning, or any focus on emotion and compassion within education, is largely absent within most so-called modern rationalistic education systems. Part of some of that thinking here around education of the heart drew on principles of engaged Buddhism, and engaging with the Buddhist Sangha more within education was also a big part of his work in this space. And I thought as a point of interest here, to draw a further connection to Latin America, I wanted to note that the famous critical pedagogy scholar and political activist Paulo Freire, who is most famous perhaps for his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, also produced a book titled Pedagogy of the Heart. And in fact that book represents some of the last writings of Freire. So Sombath's thinking here shares parallels with another internationally recognised Southern scholar around learning and teaching, and also sadly another victim of state persecution. So Freire was imprisoned in and then exiled from his home country of Brazil by the ruling military junta, and this was on the basis of some of the similar grounds for which I think we can attribute Sombath's disappearance, and that is simply trying to improve the lives of, and especially to empower vulnerable and disadvantaged people. This is an honourable life's work, but it's also one that's not welcomed by those actors who seek to exploit vulnerable and disadvantaged people and to disempower those people. Along with socio-emotional learning or spiritual development, Sombath also felt that education needed to be fun. He said that education has to be more participatory, more experiential, more stimulating, and in the learning that he promoted, he says that the first step is about identifying what young people are interested in and then using these interests to teach as many skills as possible. So as I mentioned, Sombath brought all these and other insights together in his model of joyful learning, and I'd like to finish here by quoting his own description of this model. So Sombath said that the ultimate goal of a model of quality education is joyful learning. The 4 pillars of balanced development become the 4 pillars of balanced subject areas of the curriculum. They are anchored in the curriculum of the quality school, which forms the foundation of the education model. In the quality school, the hidden, innate, multiple intelligences of young students are stimulated and encouraged to develop and grow. Teachers chip away all the inhibitions so the young person's intelligences can be discovered. At the base of the system and supporting it is the participation of children and young people themselves, represented in the model as youth leadership and participation. Thus, from the onset, young people are trained to be leaders, not only as followers. They are prepared to be better and more responsible adults. So this is a model that I think so-called modern Western education systems still have a lot to learn from, and I'm hoping to be able to draw on Sombath's thinking to guide some of these changes within the Australian setting. So there's still an awful lot that I have to do with my own research, but I hope that what this presentation has done today is to just try and offer one small example of how Sombath's ideas continue to circulate and continue to inform efforts to bring about what Robert Chambers called good change. So these are not the most positive of times for those of us that are concerned about development in Laos, but Sombath's made a lasting impact on the lives of so many people, and this impact reaches far beyond those that he's worked with directly or who were direct beneficiaries of his work. I and so many others have been forever changed by his ideas, and his ideas will continue to push thinking forward in so many different domains. So I'd like to just offer my thanks to him for that. And that's all from me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kearrin, for taking up yet another very important theme in Sombath's work through sharing some of the key concepts and terms, many of which we can actually practice on a daily basis and even here at this very moment as well. If I may pick up some of them, learning through heart, compassion, tolerance, listening to young people, and most importantly, fun. So let's have some fun as well. So let me move to our last speaker, Ajahn Eakpant, and your topic is peace building and community. So please.
Good morning, Your Excellency, good evening, and our colleagues and friends around here. I'm very honored to be here and to speak in the topic of legacy of Sombath Somphone on peace building, community development, and social justice. I think I'm one of very few people around here who haven't met Sombath in person, but I know about his disappearance through my colleagues who have been engaged in the enforced disappearance issues in the region, and of course especially Angkhana, who is sitting here. So I learned about Sombath mainly from Angkhana. The thing is I haven't been really working on the development issues very much in Thailand. My expertise is in peace and conflict studies. And by the time of Sombath abduction, I was working with a political conflict in Thailand. And a couple of years after the disappearance of Sombath, there was a coup d'etat in Thailand in 2014. And by that time, there are some similarities between, to exercise the violence, the state violence. There are several governments here in this region, especially, try to use forces and violence to silence people. The work of Sombath that has been trying to protect human rights violations, especially when development projects of the government affected a lot of lives of people. So Sombath stand up in order to pursue justice, social justice, and try to bring justice to people and the community. I think this is the reason why the government of the LaPDR feels that Sombath is a kind of opponent to the government, and of course they try to use some violence against him. And the thing is the similarity of all of these violence situations all around the region, it happens almost the same. The result is almost the same. The human rights violation, the abduction, the juridical harassment, everything is something, they are the mechanism and the tools that the authoritarian governments are using to silence people. But the thing is, I believe that the more that these authoritarian governments are trying to silence us, silence people, I think the more that our voice is louder and people and the world could hear us louder. Especially we can see from the work and the legacy of Sombath that right now there are more people can hear and know and acknowledge what had happened. So today, as a peace academic, the core principle of the peace building is to reduce or trying to make that reduction or to make the absence of the violence of all kinds. I think the work of Kun Sombath in trying to strengthen the capacity of people in the region, trying to strengthen the capacity of the people in Laos, PDR, and trying to search for social justice for the community is the way to reduce the violence. Because when people talk about violence, we always think about the physical violence. But the thing is, like, we have what we call structural and cultural violence, which is about the social structure, which is about like injustice in laws, in the economic system, in inequality, and all these kind of things are considered violent. So then we can say that poverty is violent. The attempt of Kun Sombath in trying to reduce poverty is also trying to fight with some kind of a culture and prejudice and the attitude over the cultural concerns. People in this region might think that to be poor, it's just like because you did some wrong, false merit in the past life. So that's why you are born poor in this life. So this is the thing, the work of Kun Sombath is overcoming this kind of cultural and the structural violence, to change the people's attitude, to change the quality of life, and to encourage people that to build up their capacity. It means that they can get out of this poverty and the violence in that society. As well as like the lack of accessibility, the lack of opportunity, or the asymmetrical of power. These are called violence, including the injustice, human rights violation, or even the ignorance of the human rights. These are all the violence, and the work of Kun Sombath trying to overcome all of these struggling things, to make people have access to the natural resources, to the resources. It is the need to overcome the violence. To improve the means of living, it is the way to overcome the violence. To make people have the accessibility to the means of economic availability is also the way to overcome the violence. And to provide good education, like the professor had just mentioned about earlier, with a quality education and a very good learning process. That's also the way to overcome the violence. And then last and finally, the work, the very last work that Kun Sombath has been trying to address is about like people who are affected from several government projects that people have to be evacuated from their places and areas. This is the attempt to escalate the political and social participation, and this is the way to overcome the violence. So all of his work that has been doing in the, throughout his life is the way that we can call the work of a peace builder. Because like, as long as we can reduce violence of all kinds, as long as we can overcome all of these affected problems, social problems, and trying to encourage the sustainable development. So this is the way the peace builders are doing. The thing is like, the work of Kun Sombath provide useful knowledge, skills through the community-based education, better chance for people to access the means of sustainable development, and also providing possibility to escalate the quality of life. So these are the works that he tried to reduce the poverty of the people. And the thing is like, in reduction of this violence, we can see that so many people have been benefited from the projects that he has been doing. Kun Sombath has brought peace and justice to our communities through his lifelong working. In the occasions to reminisce Kun Sombath 10 years disappearance, I think that this is the time that we show our solidarity of our civil society, international community, and also academic community in order to pursue for the truth that we have been looking for quite some time. And then, of course, once we could pursue the truth, what had happened to him, I think this is the only way that we can make the justice prevail, and I hope that his family could ease at peace. So this is for me today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Achan, particularly for expanding the concept of violence and nicely link it to the concept of poverty, which, again, among other things, Sombath really has had to work very seriously. I remember seeing his picture giving a very skeptical comment about very narrowly defined concept of poverty and tried to propose his concept of true, real poverty. So that was very nice, John. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I'd like to open up the floor to everyone here and also the participants online. We have already covered quite a bit of topics and issues, and yet there are a lot more other issues as well. Perhaps, because we still have plenty of time, my suggestion would be for the next maybe 10 minutes or so, try to stay more or less within the issues and topics that have been raised by the speakers. And after that, I'm sure there are a number of people in the audience who can have the capacity and also experience of bringing up other topics as well. So that's my suggestion, and if that's okay, I would like to welcome comments, questions, or linking some of the issues raised together. Anyone from the audience, please raise your hand. Andrew? Yeah, Andrew, yeah. I think we have a microphone, no? Or this one. I thought there are two other microphones. Okay. Thank you, Shalmali.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and Sombath was my friend. He still is. And as somebody who continues to live and work in Laos, I'm given cause to think a lot about his work and the implications. And I'd like to pick up on what Kearrin was saying about education. I process my thoughts by writing things down, so I hope you don't mind. I have a few paragraphs here. I'm not a religious person, but I pray that Sombath's legacy is that of an Ajahn, a teacher, because above all else, he taught us to focus on potential rather than problems. It's true that his vision of development represented a profound challenge, not only to government that seems to determine to destroy traditional livelihoods, but also to the international agencies that measure progress in terms of economic growth. But while the government and donors both categorize Laos as poor and underdeveloped, Sombath saw his country as rich in both biodiversity and culture and potential. He saw the glass of development as being half full, not half empty. And that's how he gave hope to those he worked with, especially to the younger generation. Sombath's disappearance was certainly a great tragedy, an inexcusable crime that threw a chilling shadow over his life, but it should not obscure the light that permeated his work. If his spirit is somehow watching us today, I suspect that he would not be surprised or even angry at the government's failure to investigate this crime. Rather, he would be smiling at how the government and the donors are adopting so many of the ideas that he promoted. Organic production, rural enterprises, youth employment, these are causes to which Sombath devoted his life, and let us remember that. If we want to use the term activism to describe the work of Sombath, then let's call him an educational activist. But he devoted his life to making Lao citizens better informed, more knowledgeable, and capable of thinking for themselves. And that's what made him so dangerous. There's nothing quite so subversive as a better education. Sombath wasn't calling for political change, he simply wanted students and farmers and development workers to be better educated. But those in power know that that is where political change starts. The ability to think for yourself is perhaps the greatest freedom that we can acquire, to be able to ask questions, form our own opinions, make our own decisions, and that is a great challenge to those in authority. Sombath challenged a system that keeps people compliant through a poor education system. He supported the generation and sharing of information, he cultivated intellectual skills, and he was and continues to be a great inspiration for many of us. In doing this, he was empowering ordinary people to become agents of change, to take greater control of their own lives. And for me, that's the legacy of my friend and Angkhana, Sombath Somphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else? We do have a microphone. Can be a question? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Michael Victor, and like Andrew, I was a good friend of Sombath, and still am a good friend of Sombath. I'm very honored to be here. I lived in Laos for many years, and now living in Africa. But just building a bit upon what Andrew said, it today got me thinking about education, access to information and knowledge, and really when I met Sombath, I was there in 2002, and I worked in communications, and we were looking at how do we go about doing communication for development? How do we start talking in Lao about development issues? And I was brought over, saying, oh, PADEC is the one doing a lot of access to information. They're making all these great videos on different topics and issues related to development. And we were looking to develop kind of a Lao database and some Lao systems. And no one had even a Lao font at that time. This is 2002, and no one had a Lao web-based font. No one was putting information onto websites in Lao. No one was using the web at that time in Laos for actually development. And so we're looking around, and we went to PADEC, and all of a sudden it was like a hive of activity. There were all these young people inputting and scanning into computers. It was the first kind of like office that I saw that was a hive of activity of young people actually trying to get information in Lao onto the web. And it was incredible to see. I think one of the things that Sombath had that hasn't really been talked about was his love for communication for development. And like Andrew said, he saw education and communication as a means to educate the youth and get the youth involved and to get to understand, have access to information. Nowadays, we see that maybe there's too much information out there. We can't remember the day when the issue was access of information. How do we get people, how do we get information to people? Nowadays, we have such a flood of information. We're not sure how to actually handle it anymore. But then there was a lack of access to information. I was thinking as everyone was talking, I'd just like to end with this kind of concept that, now social media has taken over for kids and for the youth. And I think Sombath would have been one of the first people to really try to figure out how do we use social media for good. I think as Kearrin was saying, education and happiness. How do we use social media for good? How can we get children and the youth to actually use social media for a purpose. And I think that gets back to really his groundings in Buddhist thought, that, you know, it's not the mechanism, but it's how we use it. It's how we're grounded in different things. So for me, I think, you know, if Sombath was around, and I think this is something that we could work on as we go, how do we make sure that social media is a force for good with children? And how can they use it to use information to get out there and to use it for the purposes that Sombath would like to see that for? So just wanted to add those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, Sombath was also the first, or one of the first ones who picked up video and used it for educating farmers as well. I can remember that as well. Because the previous two speakers spoke about education, maybe we can invite a few more comments or questions on education, because we are having this event on the university campus, and I can see some faces of teachers. So perhaps, what does Sombath's work tell you about education or challenges we have in the education sector, not just in university higher education, but farmers education or informal education as well. And perhaps I can also ask some of the young participants, if there are any, and get their perspectives about education in relation to Sombath's work. So what about any other people in the audience who'd like to say something? Any university teachers or just teachers? No? Do we have any? Yeah, please.
There are several texts we want to read.
Yeah, can you read them out, Anissa?
Yes, so for the first one, we have from Mary Ellen Council. And she wrote the international...
Actually, excuse me, Anissa, if they feel comfortable speaking up, they can do that as well.
Okay, so Mary, would you like to speak? So maybe,
okay, yeah,
maybe I can read the chat.
Yeah, great.
The International Coalition Against Enforced Disappearances remembers Sombath, especially on the 10th year of his disappearance. With Wijngaarden, let us leave no stone unturned and persevere in our campaign for truth and justice for Sombath and all desaparecidos of the world. And then we also have from Edita. Edita, would you like to speak instead? Okay, so I can also read this.
Please.
So from Edita, thank you for this opportunity to celebrate Sombath's works with you. I am a mother of a disappeared young man, Jonas Burgos, in the Philippines, who hoped to help farmers by teaching them what he learned in agriculture college. But he was taken at an early age, 37. These discussions bring hope that what Sombath could not accomplish while he was with his people, he can accomplish even in his absence. Thanks to his courageous and devoted wife Shumeng, Sombath continues to help young Laotians. My kudos to Shumeng and to all those helping her. Thank you all for being the voice of the voiceless, the victims of enforced disappearance. May you all be blessed, Edita Burgos. So that's it.
Okay. Anybody online would like to turn on the microphone and speak up? Do you have any questions, comments from online participants? No? How many do we have now? 21. Wonderful. Does anyone would like to speak up? No? Going once, going twice. Okay, fine. We'll come back to in-person audience then. Okay. All right. It doesn't have to be about education. It can be anything. Anything you like to say, you like to pick up. Yeah, please.
Yes, my name is my name is Alden Bellion, the co-chair of the board of Focus on the Global South. And Shuman, how are you? I was the head of the parliamentary delegation of the Asian Parliamentarians for Human Rights that went to Laos about 4 or 5 days after the disappearance. And I was with Charles Santiago, who is, in Malaysia. And we were brought to a number of high officials then of the Laos government. And it was very disconcerting that they were just completely stonewalling at that point, not even willing to say that a disappearance had taken place, completely saying that we have no knowledge of anything that you're saying, and to realize that that continues practically to be the position today. And not even acknowledging the presence of those very incriminating videos that so many of us have seen, in which we saw that Sombath was taken, obviously by authorities. And so I just wanted to say that that continues to be the position of the Laotian government, is to say nothing, admit nothing, not even disappearance. And my sense is they feel that if they can just hold out long enough, that Sombath will go away. And I think that's probably the psychology that informs the government strategy. My own sense about it is that this was not a decision that was probably made at the very highest levels of the Laotian state and of the party in Laos. However, I think that what they confront is the fact that Sombath and his cause have not gone away. In fact, it has expanded. The knowledge of his disappearance, the solidarity with the family, with Shuman, and the way that his disappearance has now become one of the major, symbols of the movement against enforced disappearances throughout the world. I think this is not something that they expected, and our only hope is to say that to tell the government of Laos that it's time that you release information, that you are not going to keep this a secret forever, because the world will not allow you to keep this secret forever, and that the pressure on you will just increase rather than decrease. And so my sense is we continue this struggle. We intensify the pressure on the government of Laos. We bring more allies to bear on them. Not just governments like the governments of the Netherlands, not just civil society, but ordinary citizens throughout the world, and show that governments, in the face of the will of the people, that the truth must come out, that governments eventually become unable to keep the truth and to keep it secret. So they think it's a waiting game, but I am confident that it is a game that we will win in the end. That information will come out because the people of the world want this information to come out. So my sense is this movement of the disappeared throughout the world, Sombath's case, the case of the husband of Angkhana, I think this is a very living cause that the authorities of governments like those of Laos and those of Thailand and like those of the Philippines will eventually, they will have to cave in to this pressure. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I'm so happy that Chulalongkorn University, the Chulalongkorn University Social Research Institute, has really taken a very strong stand on this in terms of publicizing and holding this event for Sombath. And I hope other universities also will take this stand. Thank you. Chulalongkorn University.
Thank you, Walden. Walden, in your delegation to Laos, I thought there was a parliamentarian from Indonesia as well.
Yes, definitely. There was also a parliamentarian from Indonesia who was with us at that point. There were 3 of us that went there. And we all met with the same reception, which was just a stonewall. I mean, they felt that they had to meet with us, but not to share anything. And that continues to be the same situation as far as I know. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that, and also it was pretty much, I think Walden's effort was pretty much try to communicate the voice of ASEAN parliamentarians to the Lao government. So it was really a collective effort. All right, anybody else would like? Yeah, please.
Yes, Edita, please.
Good morning.
Allow me to celebrate Sombath work now. And I will commend Involuntary competition intelligence. Otherwise, Sombath life is forgotten. My high school will amount of years that it can be the final, not so short that it was not able to be mine. They will devote a lot of these years, the best years of his life, to young people. And I commend him for that. I just want to express my thanks to those who are participating. You don't know how much hope your participation gives us families the victims of this country. Continue to trust the perpetrators and protect the lives of those who victimized. But of course, we will not allow that. And your help in this election to be lenders to
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for highlighting roles of young people and also sending encouragement to families of victims of enforced disappearance. Unfortunately, the connection wasn't really good, so I might have missed your comments. And if you want to make sure, you can also write in your comments and we can read them aloud later. All right. Okay. Anybody else who would like to speak up? You can ask questions. Particularly, one of the purposes of this event is because it's been 10 years, and unfortunately, there are increasing more people who don't know Sombath or who don't know about Sombath's work, and we like to make sure that whatever we know, we being people who know Sombath and his work, to pass on our experiences with him and his work to other people as widely and as much as possible. So questions are also welcome. Anybody else? Yes, please, Ajahn Suchan.
I'm Sulichai, now acting director of Peace and Conflict Studies at Chulalongkorn University. Mentioning that the university organizing this event is something like a statement. But in personal experience of mine, we owe so much to Sombath, in many senses. Very concretely, he had given speeches in a very major events on campus. I should like only to mention one or two, which highlighted education for sustainable development. Now we talk a lot about SDG, but it was prehistory of this SDG that Ajahn Sombath has brought us to be more familiarized to the activity with Padang. Jokingly, in Lao language, in talking about the abbreviation of the organization, Padang is fermented fish, and it was also very nice to make the nickname of the NGO he has been working. So that is how I remember from the start that we met. But in that meeting that he gave press this speech here, it was also very important that it was a big gathering of what was called Asian Public Intellectuals Fellowship Conference. I would like to mention this in the light of, not that in that occasion he also was able to meet senior professor here, Professor Pirom Gamunratanakun, who was the president of the university there, and now is the president of the University Council. So the doctor, professor is a professor of community medicine, so it might not be too strange to relate how they could have discussed important issues. So through that meeting, I should like only to mention that you see the issue of how not only on campus, what university should educate people or have to be used as a place to have important speeches. But it is also important that the responsibility of university for the issue, to be a part of public knowledge. I talk about it, the issue that Ajahn Sombath has been very in this to remember that 10 years ago since then he has been taken away from the public engagement activities that we were often engage him and get him around. So I just would like to say that it is not that Chula can give a place to organize. It is a duty and obligation of the university to be engaged in this very important occasion to recognize the contribution and the living contribution of the man, of Ajahn Sombath, and also of how his intellectual and his practice in development relates to the real world that we are talking about, SDG, global agenda. But how could not that be continued? Whatever has been forces behind the disappearance, this enforces disappearance, it is no justification whatsoever. From what I ever understand and also learn, I think the public knowledge about our future owes so much to Ajahn Sombath, not only for Laos alone, but for the whole region. When we talk about Mekong, everyone knows that biodiversity loss could not be stopped easily. We rather would like to accelerate it, but to get someone who speaks in the relationship of how human relates to nature in a more meaningful way, understood as something against the state, is a very wrong and very sad, and that became a force in the background of this event. So I really would like to bring this issue of public knowledge that he has contributed, and to highlight this, to bring it that it's our common value that we would like to see the world should really see all activities related under how we make peace with the earth, how we make peace with the biodiversity, not only political in the sense of that narrow political understanding, but that all the whole efforts were so precious, so meaningful. So we would like to highlight that, and also to bring the sense of indebtedness to this, and to strengthen our sense of common responsibility following his leadership. And for this occasion, then I would like really to see how we can also have further discussion with young people, our students, and with neighboring countries, because the situation in our whole region, I am standing here in front of Angkhana, who has been a long time friend, but also for me, she's also a Chunmeng, more than a friend or respected person, but someone who is standing a witness of something that we all need to really be firm, and there is no right at all no reason at all to justify enforced disappearances. There is no other. But even more, it must be open to the public, so that allow people can be also be reunited in the meaningful sense with his work. And for that, Angkhana, the story of Angkhana, I think everyone in Thailand also have been learning, especially through the historic parliamentary support that Angkhana pushed forward for the law against enforced disappearance. For the first time, anonymous voting in the parliament. How Thailand could learn from the sad and very inhuman act against a life of a very important lawyer. Nothing to be nothing, it's just not a story, not just news, but that is a lesson for the whole nation as well. So I am talking here as to talk about Ajahn Sombath, but it relates us to something more that we share. That's why we see that it is an obligation of our university. It is not just another activity to be recorded, but it's something more more as for us as a part of something that we work together, something that we share. We would like to push forward more for whenever we talk about sustainability issue in the future. This is a living and also always a knowledge, and also the person that we should also bring around. And in that spirit, I think what Ajahn Eakpant mentioned about peacemaking, it's just peacemaking that he has been devoting, and Kun Somchai too. But the very violent that made it happen like this really should be put forward to the public spotlight, and we would like to work together and still when we are around. I think our university should be more engaged to our intergenerational place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to continuous role to be played by Chulalongkorn University. Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to invite maybe one or two more comments from the audience or from the online participants. Anybody else would like to speak up? Anybody would like to speak up? No? You know, this event didn't just emerge overnight. We went through a bit of discussion to make sure, you know, to cover all the relevant issues. And I have a long list of topics that people in the planning processes raised. And I just quickly went through them. And amazingly, we've covered just about everything, except for maybe, I think it was Andrew who mentioned a bit about engaged Buddhism. But if anybody would like to, you know, elaborate on that, because maybe not all of us here or online are familiar with engaged Buddhism. So if somebody would like to say something more, particularly in its relevance to Sombath's work, we can do that. Anybody would like to? No? Andrew? No? Or? Okay, well, then Shumen can mention it in her concluding remarks. Perhaps another topic would be climate issues, I mean, which are so important these days, but nobody really clearly mentioned climate issues. Anybody would like to say something about how we sort of, you know, view climate challenges and crises, particularly by building upon Sombath's work and all that? Yeah, please. Maybe at the bottom?
Thank you. Well, just very briefly, I'm working on climate adaptation and community-based approaches in Laos. And the idea is that Sombath, you know, it would be wonderful if I could consult with him, because many of his ideas continue to influence me. I think the work that the development agencies are doing is very often very technocratic when it comes to climate adaptation. But what we see is that a key factor there is social solidarity as a key factor in resilience to climate change. And I think Sombath's approach of integrating you know, knowledge of agroecology with traditional, you know, protecting traditional knowledge and the collective action that comes through, you know, the community working together. I think his ideas there we're using those, and I think very valuable contribution to that work. So I'm not being very coherent there, but I would just love to be able to talk to him about the work we're doing on that, because I think he could offer so much advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think you nicely represented our feelings. I mean, not just for climate crisis, but for anything. I mean, so many of us would like to consult with Sombath right here. Yeah. Okay. Anybody from? Oh yeah, Carl, please.
Thank you very much. I was wondering whether to respond to your invitation as an educator, like should I say something? Actually, very nice. I'm an assistant professor here at Chulalongkorn University. I teach in the Faculty of Political Science, but actually really I'm here more because as a concerned citizen thinking really about what a horrendous act and forced disappearance is. And so whether we're talking about the cases in Mexico, the cases that we've heard in Thailand, in Laos, so actually I'm rather here in solidarity with all of the people that either experience this or want to bring attention to it. I definitely agree with Ajahn Surachai on the role of the university. It's not just teaching, and this discussion that we've been having about the importance of education is something that obviously we associate with the university, but we need to have far more. It's a public institution that should be having public discussions. So I teach on a course which is International Development Studies. I think I appreciated Kearrin's discussion about the importance of thinking about how development is being taught. And I think on our program we can have, or we do have, very critical discussions about the development model, and rightly so. I think this has been brought up by the panel, it's been brought up by the discussions we've had from the floor. But I think what's more challenging is actually seeking hope, seeking happiness, seeking joy, and also thinking about care and empathy in teaching as well. And so I think this is what I'd like to bring to the discussion, that actually our students did have the opportunity to visit Padek when we do our international field trips. And so when we teach in the classroom about a lot of issues around development, about social injustices, the ecological injustices, but it's really only when students get out and talk with different people that they can really grasp these issues. And so in one of the years we visited Padek and we could learn about the inspirational educational approaches that were being taught. We met with the youth that were, again, actually this was shared in the experience of busy offices. When we visited, it was a hive of activity because there were youth learning about all their different skills in different classrooms, and then at the same time we learned about the whole model of development, and it really inspired our students. And then I think it's only then that it can click what we discussed about ideas about development. Only people that inspire can actually use their microphones to see how it changes. So just as a final thought, there's something more to look forward to. So as I said, I'm here mainly in solidarity, but also hoping to find inspiration in the discussions that could be had. And I think that's been reflected very much in what's been shared here. And so if one of the emphases is on rethinking education, I think that's what we also inspire to in our program. And what I'd want to add to this is not just the happiness or the hope, but also the ethics of empathy, the ethics of care, and how to bring that into our education systems. And maybe that's something that could be carried forward by the networks that are working in this room and beyond. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kanokwan Manorom, based at Wijngaarden University. I'm very glad to be here. I met Ajahn Sombath 14 years ago. We were sitting in the room together, joining the conference on the Mekong development. And also, 8 years later, I met his young fellow. And she became my young fellow who worked on the Mekong, particularly on hydropower issues. So Ajahn Sombath is a real legacy. And what Ajahn Sombath pointed when I was sitting with him, he said development could bring hope. At the same time, development could bring disaster, problems. So Ajahn Sombath, from my perspective, he was trying to rescue the problems of development. And I witnessed from his young fellow. She's now doing her PhD in Thailand. So I could see the benefit the opportunity Ajahn Sombath gave to his young fellow, particularly the concept of sustainable development, the concept of what does it mean by happiness in Lao society or in the Mekong region as a whole. So I really respect him, and I'm so happy to have this book. And thank you, Michael, for buying this book for me. Actually, I would like to buy it myself. Yeah, I'm going to read this book again in order to recall myself to Ajahn Sombath. I hope he's happily smiling somewhere, listening to us today. Thank you very much.
Anybody else would like to speak up from the audience or online? How are our online friends doing? Anybody would like to? If not, then as I promised earlier, I'm now coming back to our prominent four speakers. Are you ready? Okay, so you have around 3 minutes or so, and you can connect some of the issues, or you can add whatever you feel has been left out in your topic and expertise. Who would like to go first? Ajahn, yeah, please.
I'm not following like the role, the first round.
No problem.
Okay. The thing is like because there were not so many kind of patients, but the thing is like what I missed just right now that I didn't mention, maybe because like we have very short period of time. But the thing is like there are certain issues that we have to be really focused on, like how to get into the truth and try to find the truth about the Kun Sombath's disappearance. The thing is like just now like there was like a kind of the role of ASEAN. I think this is the time, it should be the time that we have to revisit and reconsider the non-intervention policy of ASEAN member states. The reason because enforced disappearance is a kind of international recognition, and this is the crime against humanity. So then it should not be considered as the internal affair any longer. So then I think this is the role that the international community should be emphasized and should address more often and constantly. The second thing is about like the role of the democracy. I think to promote democracy is one of the most efficient tools. First of all, to find the truth. And the secondly is to have the work of Kun Sombath continued and benefit to the people in the future. Why promotion of the democracy is very important? The thing is like in a democratic society, there will be less factors that contribute to the authoritarian aggression. There will be less people who can feel comfortable to abuse the power. There will be less government officials who will be able to abuse the power. And then, and in the democratic society, we will allow at least people who have been submitted to the authority to be brave enough or to be comfortable to come out and speak out the truth and playing the role of the citizens and being fully participated in the society. And finally, in the democratic society, it helps people to learn throughout generations of their basic rights and how they could be engaged in political, economic, and social issues of their own community and countries. And these kind of things will be, will be benefited to at least find the truth and make the work of Kun Somchai, Kun Sombath has been, developed and learned throughout generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, my boss just told me that we still have time, so we don't have to stick to the 3-minute. So Ajahn, if you want to say a bit more, or we can come back to you later. Okay. Yeah. So who'd like to go next? Angkhana, please.
Thank you very much, Toshi. Firstly, I want to respond about the education and the how to use the social media. I want to say that during COVID-19, I think that we learned a lot about the difficulties to access education, especially to use the social media, because we know that it's not we are not talking about people who stay in the big city, but we have to think about the vulnerable people in some remote area that cannot access to internet. Some families not have the tablet, or maybe some families have only one iPhone for 5 or 6 children. So it's quite difficult for vulnerable groups of people to access education if they not have the internet. And for the education, I think that, for example, for my country, for Thailand, even the constitution currently non-discrimination and people must be equally, but in reality, in the education curriculum, we not have the human rights education, especially how we can start the human rights education since the children, how they can learn to respect to other people who have difference, like diversity, cultural, tradition or whatever. I think this is a big problem of our ASEAN countries, that we don't have like a strong human rights education in the school for boys and girls. And even though many countries in ASEAN ratify a lot of international human rights convention, but most of our people not know about the convention, how it's processed, and how people will be benefit to that convention. So I think this is the main challenges for us, and how we can support our new generation. During my term as a Human Rights Commissioner, the Commission worked a lot for the human rights education. We have to cooperate with the Ministry of Education. We have to prepare for the curriculum, but the most difficulties is that how we can put it in all the schools. And it's more difficult, how can we find the teachers that totally understand about human rights and dignity. So this is very challenging. And secondly, I want to respond to my colleagues talking about the families in Mexico. I'm really honored to talk to honor the families of the disappeared person, especially in Latin America, in Argentina, in Chile, in Mexico. You know that in 1980s, the families, the mothers, they went to Geneva to have a meeting with the diplomat and asking the diplomat community in Geneva to find or create or establishing the mechanism to protect all persons from enforced disappearances. And in 1992, the General Assembly issued the Resolution 47/133 to adopt the first declaration to protect all persons from enforced disappearances. And this year and this month, the declaration is now 30 years anniversary. And the declaration still active and created the mandate from the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. And after that, in 2006, the declaration, the working groups, and especially the hard-working and continuous struggle of the families, in 2006, we developed to the International Convention to protect all persons from enforced disappearance. And this is the successful of the families. So the successful is not come from the government, it's not come from the diplomats, but it's from the victims, it's from the families, it's from the women. So I would like to honor all the families. And recently, last couple of days, I read the report of the committee on the CEDAW committee, the committee on the eradication of all form of discrimination on women. The CEDAW committee released its decision on the complaint of the mothers from Mexico for the remedies. Because for the CEDAW committee, each person cannot accept remedies in their country. The judiciary declined to give any remedies. Women can complain to CEDAW committee, and it's one of the successful of the families and the women. For Thailand also, the list of issues of CEDAW committee released last week is mentioned about the Enforced Disappearance Act in Thailand and asking about how gender balance of the committee of the Enforced Disappearance in Thailand, how the government ensure that the committee will have gender diversity. And also, the committee also asked that the Enforced Disappearance and Torture Act have some sections that not comply with international law. The committee concerned that it might affect and might be harmful to women as the victims of the disappearance. So I think there's a lot of mechanism that support the families right now, and it's not from the UN, it's not from Geneva, but it's from the ground, it's from the families. And my last thing, during my first round, I'm talking about the development and human rights, and I want to say that for Sombath Somphone, Sombath is very simple person. He's very polite. He's very humble, and nobody expects that he will be victims of enforced disappearance. And now there are 6 people who disappeared in Laos that documented and investigated by the UN Working Group on enforced disappearance under our humanitarian mandate. But the problem right now is that in ASEAN we not have real democracy, especially in Laos. We cannot have the public conference like this talking about enforced disappearance in Laos. And we don't know when people can be supported to speak and not forced to silence. they can have freedom of speech to talk on behalf of the victims, the families, the women. And I think that this is very challenging, and I would like to support Sumin. I understand that during the past 10 years, she's working so hard. She's traveling to everywhere to talk about the painful story. And it's very traumatized. I can understand that how traumatized she faces, but she not stopped. And this is not only for Sombath, but I hope that it will make a big change in Laos and in ASEAN also. And I truly believe that as Laotian son, Sombath legacy will be alive forever and will be benefit to his beloved countries, especially to his people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter, would you like to be next?
Thank you. I want to thank Angkhana first for your long work for human rights, but also for mentioning the work of families, in particular remembering the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina. Last week, the founder, who we know in Latin America just by her first name, Pepe, passed away. But I think that what you said is very true, that it's always, in the case of forced disappearance or extrajudicial execution, it's always the families who force change, who force the truth. As it is in general the victims of other kinds of crimes and human rights violations that, thanks to the struggle of indigenous people, we have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Thanks to the struggle of women, we have the UN Declaration against all forms of discrimination against women. I also, in terms of issues close to Sombath, I remember that he was concerned about traditional or indigenous people in Laos, but also about peasant. And I think it's important to mention that thanks to many years of struggle by La Via Campesina, we also have UN DROP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other peoples working in rural areas. I wanted to just make a few comments to tie some of the things together that different people have said. Kearrin mentioned Paulo Freire from Brazil, the great Brazilian educator and pedagogue. And one of the things he said is that education changes the people who change the world. And so in that sense, our role in education is critical. And as I mentioned before, the global peasant movement, La Via Campesina, we take very much to heart those principles. Paulo Freire is a big inspiration for several processes that are related to the concerns of Sombath. One is the creation of peasant agroecology schools around the world where peasants teach their knowledge and wisdom to other peasants on how to farm sustainably, resiliently, reduce greenhouse emissions from agriculture, live in harmony with their own spirituality and with Mother Earth. Here in Thailand, Kusri, who's one of the sponsors of this event, Focus, who's one of the sponsors of this event, La Via Campesina Thailand, Samacha Komchon, the Assembly of the Poor here in Thailand, are all, and others are all working together on the National Peasant Agroecology School here in Thailand as part of this global push by La Via Campesina of grassroots, peer-to-peer education. And another thing related to that is the struggle of La Via Campesina to change rural schools. And I think this really connected to me when I heard about the 4 pillars of Sombath for education. Because what La Via Campesina says is that the government schools in the village, everywhere in the world, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Europe, what they teach the rural people is shame. Shame for being peasant, shame for being indigenous person. The message, both the explicit but beyond all the implicit and subliminal messages in the whole educational process, is that you have no knowledge, you are ignorant, your life is a life of poverty and misery, and what you should do is prepare yourself to move to the city. And in the city, everything is better. How textbooks in the village will have pictures of buildings and street lights, which perhaps cannot even be imagined in the village. And what they do is they create this dream of migrating out of the village and into the city, and which usually means the urban slum and a life of unemployment, crime, gangs, unhealthy conditions, miserable salary, bad work, and some many dreams of how wonderful was the life in the village before. So based on that, the peasant movement is trying to struggle to change the way the pedagogy and the content in rural schools to teach pride for being peasant, pride for being indigenous person, the desire to gain knowledge in order to contribute to a good life with dignity in the rural area. And so this is, I think, something that connects a lot to what we heard about Sombath's ideas on education. We heard that one of his pillars was connecting the heart and the mind. And this is something very, very powerful in Latin America that we call senti pensante. Senti is to feel, and pensante is to think. And that the good decision, the good actions are senti pensado. They're thought felt by the heart and by the head at the same time. And in order to move people to positive action, then through education, we have to reach simultaneously. It's not just reach the heart, it's not just reach the head, but it has to reach both at the same time. Thank you, Jared, for your brilliant analysis of structural violence. And I think that this is something that comes up again and again. I remember in La Villa Campesina, the women peasants were in an area where 100,000 acres had been land grabbed by a eucalyptus planting cellulose company for a paper factory. And they threw the peasants off the land, so the peasants could no longer grow food for their own families, and that mothers could no longer put food into the mouth of their own children. And the company had a complex of very fancy greenhouses producing the eucalyptus tree seedlings. And so one night at about 3 in the morning, 3,000 peasant women invaded this complex and destroyed all of the greenhouses where these eucalyptus plants were being, seedlings were being produced, in order to destroy their land, because a eucalyptus plantation basically leaves the land useless for maybe a generation after that. And they were accused by the state of being terrorists and of committing the ultimate capitalist crime, which is a crime against property. And the state defined violence as destruction of private property. And they responded that the real violence is depriving thousands and thousands and thousands of peasant women and peasant families of the ability to put food in the mouth of their own children. And so this is what I thought of when you were explaining to us the structural violence. And I think La Villa Campesina in Colombia undergoing a very important peace process right now. The Villa Campesina organizations are trying to build peasant agroecology, and their slogan is peasant agroecology betting on peace, because it's a way for peasants to remain in the rural area, preserve biodiversity, produce healthy food, and have dignity. And this is a way, as you say, a way to build peace and to reduce violence. So I wanted to close by coming back to the role of the state. And I think that the state is always responsible, even when so-called non-state actors do the dirty work. We know all about paramilitaries in Latin America, and we know the role of the state and militaries with paramilitaries. And so, in my short life experience and familiarity with forced disappearance, it's always the state. And it's the state by commission or by omission. but the state has responsibilities. And so even in the cases where it's not actual commission, it's certainly omission. And it's very important, this forcing civil society, having to force the state to take responsibility for its acts of commission or its acts of omission. In either case, the state is the final entity that is responsible for forced disappearance. And I want to share, and really close by sharing what people say in Latin America whenever people gather, particularly the family members of those who have been disappeared forcibly, which is to say that vivos los llevaron, vivos los queremos. Alive they were taken, alive we want them. And I think their silence, because they can't be with us, is one of the most eloquent expressions that we have. The absolute silence of those who are disappeared that makes the rest of us reflect and speak out. I think that's very eloquent. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Kearrin, I hope you're still there. We'd like to see you again on the screen. Are you there? Okay. Wonderful.
I am.
Yeah, so give us more joy and fun, please.
Unfortunately, there was parts of the conversation that I wasn't able to follow so clearly, so I didn't want to make too long of a concluding comment, and I think he has just done a really, made a really excellent summary anyway. So I'll just, I guess, say something brief, is to say that one of the things that people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So one of the things that I guess I'm endlessly grappling with as a scholar of development, and which no doubt many other people in the room are continually grappling with, is you know, how do we make sense of this term? What does development actually mean? We come up with answers to this, but we continually revisit it, and we can attempt to define development in many different ways. Sombath, of course, provided us with some answers to this question, and there are a number of other scholars who have also done some really fantastic work around trying to answer the question of what development is as a concept, what it might mean. But when it comes to practice, in different places and in different times, what development means is also constantly changing. There's different views between actors, and different representations or understandings of development are shaped heavily by power relationships and by politics. So, you know, development as a form in practice is really a kind of a landscape of competing claims, so different knowledge claims, different claims over access to and usage of resources, different claims as to what constitutes progress or what constitutes good change. Who gets to determine what that is, and whose voices are heard in these decisions and whose are not. So thinking about development in that kind of way, the work of Sombath is very much alive and with us and present today. It's not finished. His ideas continue to take on new meanings. They continue to shape and reinform new debates, whether that's about education, whether that's about youth empowerment, whether it's about climate change and any of the other things that he worked on that people have discussed in the room today. And beyond his ideas, his work as well offers, you know, continues to offer us with many examples of successful alternatives which were people-centred, which take culture seriously, which seek to empower disadvantaged and vulnerable communities, which seek environmental sustainability and so on. So all I really wanted to say briefly in closing, I guess, is that Sombath's ideas, Sombath's work has not disappeared and will not disappear. and it's been really, really an amazing thing today to hear different discussions and the different ways that people are engaging with his work and his ideas and the ways that I think we see it continue to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Kearrin. Ajahn, did you have anything to add? No? It's okay? All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Now then, let me invite Shuiman. Would you like to come up and shoot that out? Yeah, as maybe even everyone, or many of us at least know, Shuiman is Sombath's wife and also author of that book, Silencing of a Laotian Son. And we would like her to somehow put together all the issues that are discussed to the extent that you can. Take it easy. And give us some sort of conclusion so that we can move ahead. Please, Shuiman.
Thank you.
Oh, here.
Thank you. I really want to thank all of you. Thank to the organizers, and it's not just one organization. All these different organizations have come together and to put together the Sombath Symposium. When we were discussing this idea about the symposium, it's very difficult to come up with a theme. And I was thinking, over the past 10 years, I've always spoken about what happened, the injustice of enforced disappearance, the violations of enforced disappearance, to the family, to the people who have been left behind, and the sadness that consumes all the victims and the families. But for this particular symposium, and in discussion with the organizers, I say, let's put away the sadness, let's put away the injustice. Not that we forget, we will never forget, but let's celebrate. Celebrate the life of Sombath, celebrate his values and his legacy. And from what I hear today, from all the speakers, from Peter, from Angkhana, from Ajahn Eakpant, and from all the speakers who have spoken up, from Ajahn Surachai, from Walden, from Andrew, from Michael, from everyone who has commented online and offline, I am so thankful and grateful and appreciative that so many of you who, some of you have worked with Sombath, some of you have not worked with Sombath, some of you don't even know and have never met Sombath, have somehow managed to pull together some of his thoughts, his ideas, and the principles which have guided his work and put it into your own work. I don't think I need to summarize. Frankly, you people have summarized even beyond what myself, and if somebody were here listening, I'm sure he's here listening, he will say, wow, you have actually expanded what I was trying to do and interpreted it in your own ways, in so many positive ways, and you are putting it into your own practice. So for that, I'm really, really thankful for this symposium. I think this symposium is really quite different from previous symposiums, and I think we have tried to pull together all the thoughts, principles, and values of not only Sombath, of what we are trying to do as concerned people, concerned about development, concerned about justice, concerned about peace, concerned about leaving for our children a better world. I think you have put it together. I just want to summarize very quickly some of the basic words are here and something which is very dear to Sombath's heart. One is really about respect. Respect of yourself, and therefore you are doing what you're doing, and respect for others, respect for the earth, for our planet. Because it's without that, we wouldn't even be able to walk on the surface of the earth and live our life in a dignified manner. So that respect, I think, is really reflected and seen today in all the people who are sitting around in the room, but also offline. The fact that people offline are willing to even register, take the trouble to register and be part of this symposium really shows how much they want the world to be better. They want their own lives to be better. They want their children's lives to be better. And not only for themselves, but especially for those people who may not be in the same privileged condition as themselves, who come to universities, who have the opportunity to actually navigate the social media world, to be connected through the internet. As Angkhana has said, many people don't have that opportunity because they don't have the devices, they don't have the knowledge or the capacity to be linked up. So that I really think is very well reflected. The next word is really participation. And this is really dear to Sombath. That's why he called his organization Participatory Development Training Center. And he says that no one should be left behind. Everybody has a right to voice their thoughts, their concerns, and participate. Participate in a real conversation, in expressing their thoughts. No matter how small, how insignificant, everybody has that right to put on the table, to tell anybody is willing to listen, their view of the world. And hopefully, their view will also be translated into something which will not destroy their own value system. So participation is something that I see. And this very active participation, involvement, communication has been expressed so clearly today that it really touches me very deeply. Today we hear also that many of you work with people who are voiceless. You're actually giving voice to the people, who suffer under structural violations or injustice, who actually cannot live peacefully. They have been violated in so many different ways. Even the fact that they don't even have food on the table is a violation, an ultimate violation of our human condition, that we cannot even have food in our stomach to sustain us as human beings. That kind of violation, I think Sombath understood very clearly because of his own experience of living as a poor farm boy. He knows what hunger is. He knows what it is not to be able to eat, never mind about 3 full meals, to even have 1 meal a day, because they face so many challenges. Agriculturists all face, they have a crop, put on the field, the floods come and wipe everything off, and then that's it. So I think what I want to share with you is that Sombath, what he has done and what he has done or put forward is actually drawn very much from his own experience. his own life conditions, his own experience, and also because he has great empathy. Talk about education, empathy. Empathy to how to not let other people living in the same situation as he was, as a poor farm boy, go through the same difficulty. How to ameliorate the situation. How can we use, he always told me, he says, he's one of 8 children, and he's the only one who had the opportunities to study abroad. And he said, it's just by chance, by luck, that I had this opportunity to study abroad. And because of that opportunity, he said, I must now give back. Giving back has always been the underlying driving force for him to do what he's doing, give back. And this is why he focuses so much on working with children and young people, especially those in the rural areas, because he knows what their lives is. Somebody is not very theoretical. Actually, he would, you know, I don't think he's read Paulo prayer, but he knew what oppression is. He knew what deprivation is. He knew what marginalization is. So he basically uses his own experience and his own, I think he draws a lot of it from indigenous, he talks about indigenous wisdom. It's not about theoretical knowledge, but the knowledge of the people he lived with, the lives he had had, and he had this, perhaps his indigenous knowledge to pull things together and to distill them and to make it relevant. But first he says, I must make it relevant in my own surrounding. So all these things about, you know, the value system you talk about, you know, giving voice to the people, respect, participation, listening, observing, he puts it into his practice. And this was what has driven him to do the many things he has been doing, first in the area of agriculture, agroecology. And he says, look, you know, why rice-based integrated farming system? He said, look, nobody in Laos will only do one thing. We have to do many things. You just don't grow rice, you have to grow rice with vegetables, raise animals, raise fish. It's all within one system. And he said, yes, you know, in the village, in the farms my parents have been working on, we're not very systematic, we are not very, you know, not sometimes, we face a lot of problems where we don't know how to address them because we don't have the technologies. He said it's not about technology, it's about pulling all these issues together, and he uses the term joining all the dots together. Because they're disparate here, there, the knowledge is all over. But how do we pull that knowledge together, distill it, and make it into some kind of practical, easily understood system for other people to emulate, to copy, to practice. So practice, they always say, for years, for many, many years, he's just working inside, his work unknown outside, because he said, I don't even know what to tell people. I need to learn. And learning has become his main, another one of his main value. Learning. Learning from his own experience, learning from others, listening to the other people. And I think later in his life, people heard about his work, they go and visit him, like, you know, they take the students to visit him, and then he became more known in the region, and later became more known internationally. He gets invited to university. Ajahn Surichai, are you here? He gets invited to Chula to speak. He was so surprised, what am I going to say? He said, Shemeng, I'm going to Chula. What am I going to say? You know, in this forum called the Asian Intellectuals. Wow, who are these people? All these professors and teachers. I'm just a farmer. I said, never mind. Just go and tell your own story. I say all because I came from academic world. I say, most of them are only theoreticians. They really don't know what they're talking about. So if you just tell them what you do, it will probably make a lot of sense to them. So he gained the confidence, thank you to people like Ajahn Sri Chai, gave him experience on a larger stage to, share his experiences. He never say, I'm sharing my knowledge. He said, I don't have much knowledge to share. I can only share what I have learned from what I do. And this has always been his principle, practice. And if people find it useful, he says you can never copy a model. We have, even though Thailand, Laos, we share similar problems, but they are different. If you just copy and paste, you get a cartoon. You don't get the real thing. So this has always been his driving force. And because he works in Laos, he also realized there's so much to do in terms of education. He always say the schools actually don't educate. The schools teach you how to memorize certain things within a structured curriculum. But when you leave school, you really have no skills. You have no skills to actually find a job. You go to a job, you learn. The first thing you do is you better learn, because what you have learned, you may not be applicable. So that's why he focused on how can I use the opportunities offered to me, knowing that many Laos schools don't have a lot of resources for computer classes, extracurricular activities, even sports activities. A lot of the young people's time after school is they hang around and they don't have anything to do. So he said, he's an opportunist. Okay? He said, let me use this opportunity, use this spare time that young people have to bring them together and see whether they want to learn something. What is of interest to them? That's why he had all this informal or non-formal education program going into the school, into the temples, into the, setting up his own center where young people spend the weekends there. They find out what they want to learn. Was at one time, but every weekend was a hive of activity of young people gathering together and giving these young people their own experience to learn something they want to learn, but also to share when they go to the community, when they do community servicing activities. So education, he found finally in the end, more or less, 10 years before he was disappeared, he came up with this education for sustainable development. That is his 4 pillars, where, you have in learning, you have to have, make sure you respect nature, culture. The economy is a very important pillar. You can't make a living by talking about, just empty thinking. You still have to make enough money to feed your family, and spirituality. And all that under a foundation of good education and good governance that will provide the overarching roof for happiness or well-being. And he summarized that, he shared it with a number of seminars, including one at UNESCO, and they were saying, wow, what do you think? Wow, this all makes so much sense. He said, no, all this I copy from other people. I learned, basically he learned, and then he said, I copy from other people. Learning from the heart, head and hand, it doesn't come from me. It came from Ajahn Sulak. Ajahn Sulak of saying, they have been pushing this idea of, because Ajahn Sulak's organization, I'll come back to English Buddhism, talks about learning with your head, your hands, and your heart. And so he came up with this saying, education of the heart is the heart of education. And it continues to be like the tagline for many of the youth activities that he started in Laos. And I think it's still, many people remember it and uses it. So I want to close with why engage Buddhism. This is something which was not talked about very much today. Sombath, like so many Lao people, is a nominal Buddhist. Nominal in the sense that he doesn't go to the temple. He will go, you know, if there are festivals, he says, okay, you people go. You know, sisters will go and, you know, when they go offer to the temple, he hardly goes to the temple. His story he told me is that, like every Lao male child, they have to be ordained as a monk at least once in their life, but normally at critical moments of their lives. So he was leaving home to go to a bigger town. After he finished 2 years of primary school, he had to go to another place to live with a relative so that he can continue the rest of his primary education. His parents said, go to the temple and become a monk. So he was supposed to be a monk at least for a week, 5 days. He left after 2 days. And his parents were upset. His mother was very upset. He said, why? He said, no, I sit there and they don't teach me anything. I sit there, I'm supposed to meditate. Why am I meditating on? Nobody. So he ran away. And then later he says, I'm actually better than my father. My father only stayed 1 day. I managed to stay 3 days. So he says that this is the kind of Buddhism, truly is a kind of Buddhism that many Lao people continue to practice. They see that going to the temple, becoming a monk, and all the ritual things that go around is all about Buddhism. So he actually was not interested in Buddhism until he met Ajahn Sulak and his group of people. Many of you know Ajahn Sulak here very well. Ajahn Sulak has basically is a Thai intellectual. I just celebrated his 90th birthday with him in Korea. And he too wants to look at Buddhism, how to get Buddhism to be relevant. And he was studying elsewhere and so on, and he started what he called the Engaged Buddhism movement, which is Buddhism, if it is so important in the life of a society, needs to be relevant. Buddhism is not just what happens inside the temple. So he managed to develop a whole system. He trained monks, nuns, and so on, interested monks and nuns who want to become more engaged in society. You take the teachings of the Buddha into the community, not the community come into the temple to chant. You take the teachings, the fundamental teachings of the Buddha into the community, meaning into the school, into the university, into general society, and work together. And what do we all want to do in terms of Buddhism? Transmit the teachings of Buddha, which can be summarized as compassion, respect for life, not only human life, all life, which means respect also for nature, the environment. How do we, if you call yourself a Buddhist, how do you actually translate all the teachings of the Buddha? The Buddha, he says, and he started to learn about Buddhism only then. Then he really read the Buddhist texts, he read about the writings of Ajahn Sulak, he read the writings of Ajahn Kearrin and many of the Buddhist teachers. And he says, well, you know, I just learned the Buddha is not supposed to be prayed to. Buddha said, don't listen to me, go find out yourself. He said, wow, Buddhist is a very scientific person. He said, yes. So he really learned and became, I think, later, before the last 10 years before he disappeared, he was a practicing Buddhist in the real sense of the word. He uses Buddhism to guide his own life. He meditates, he teaches other people to meditate, and he uses engaged Buddhism and to really enrich his work. A lot of his work, as especially those related to the environment, and his concern for climate change came out of the latter part, the second half of his working life, where he learned from the people. That's why he said, I don't know, I never start anything. I just go and pick and choose, and I'm lucky enough to have very good teachers. And put together, and then they say, oh, you know, you are the one who talked about education of the heart, hands, and the head. No, he said, it is Ajahn Sulat, the one who first talked about education of the heart, hands, and head. So, I think in conclusion, Sombath basically is a very down-to-earth human being, very humble, yes, very humble, partly because he says, first, you don't teach unless you know what you're trying to practice, right? So he listens, he uses his own experience and what is relevant in his own environment in terms of culture, agriculture, belief systems, to make sense. He said, I'm not trying to teach the world, I'm trying to see how we can improve the lives of the Lao people. First of all, the Lao people. And then if other people find it relevant, they can take it to whatever their environment is. And he says, observing what has been happening, he says that he talks about greed in the Buddhist sense. He says that the world has enough for everyone, but not enough to feed the greed. Thank you.
Chairman, so much for covering and also revisiting many of the issues, or even all the issues that we have talked about today, especially with all these episodes and experiences that we have had with Sombath, which I think made all these issues more real and really relatable to all of us. So thank you very much. Now we have Mr. Paluk Khalid online, representing Asia Europe People's Forum, Pakistan, which is one of the co-organizers of the event. And we'd like to give us some words. Mr. Paluk, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Focus on Global South, for organizing this symposium on the 10th year of disappearance of Sombath. And what great to hear so many now. Great to hear the ordinary life of Sombath, which Choming has just explained, how he has lived, how he thought of Buddhism and so on. Now I bring here solidarity from Asia Europe People's Forum, and I had the honor of attending the Lao meeting in 2012. I was part of a delegation from Pakistan, and I'm speaking now from Lahore. We attended that meeting, and we were really very surprised to see the high quality of organization of the AEPF in Lao. And also we had the honor to meet him, discuss with him, to sit with him for some time. And we never thought that we are meeting a great man who will just disappear. And this disappearance is a household word in Pakistan also. It is one of the major issues of the past period of the democratic rights. We know how human would be feeling that we have many mothers and sisters here in Pakistan whose loved one has just disappeared, are missing and household, missing and disappearance. This is what we are experiencing in Pakistan under military government and also under civilian government, which are mainly dominated by military establishment. So here, it's not an issue of just Lao people or just one country, but this is an international issue, and we must raise our voice in the strongest manner And I was happy to see the column of Ahmad, which is one of the best read columnists of Pakistan, where he devoted a full column into 2 languages, which was translated in other languages on Sombath, when he attended our Kearrin in Kent and met Shomi over there. And so Sombath's name in Pakistan is also known to all the actors, because they know he is one of us who is not there with us physically, but mentally and agroecology is with us. I am here by expressing our solidarity on behalf of Asia, Europe, and Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farid, for your solidarity message. Really appreciate it. Now I'd like to invite Shalmali, Guttal from Focus on the Global South.
I just want to say thank you.
I can do too. So, yeah, go ahead. And make sure to make announcements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to make some really practical announcements. So the first thing is I'd like to thank everybody, thank our speakers for being with us and sharing and helping to knit together different values and aspects of Sombath's work. Swimming doesn't mean thanks, swimming means our support. And she has it. Because there are people who are, as noticed, the people who are joining here, but people joining online, and there will be more and more events organized, and the campaign will continue as Walden proposed and suggested that we won't keep quiet, because as many have pointed out, the crime of enforced disappearance is a crime in perpetuity, it's an enduring crime, and it doesn't end until it is resolved. And those who are involved in the crime are waiting for us to forget, but we won't forget. And one of the ways to not forget is not only to keep asking for justice, but, as Shwemi said, to celebrate and honor the life and legacy of those who have been disappeared, because we can't let their legacy disappear. It's too precious. Sombath's legacy is precious, and we will not let that disappear. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming here and joining with us, and thank you, Kearrin, for joining us online, and all the friends who joined us from online. I also want to make sure that everybody knows that this is the first of a series of events. The next event is going to be on 13th December from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. And that's a press conference on the 10th anniversary. And then on the 14th of December from 2 to 4 p.m., the Embassy of Sweden has invited and is hosting a discussion by invitation on diplomatic briefing on the case of Sombath. So that will be a briefing for diplomats. And on the 15th of December, at the Bangkok Arts and Cultural Center, the BACC, right opposite MBK, from 1 to 8 p.m., there is going to be a public event on the 10th anniversary of Sombath's disappearance, titled We Shall Not Forget. And the 15th of December is the actual date when Sombath was disappeared. And that will culminate this series of events that we're all co-organizing tomorrow, Sombath's disappearance. But just to say in closing that our campaigns and our struggles to honor Sombath's work and legacy and make sure that that continues does not, of course, end with these events. These are continuing in various aspects of everything that we do. So yeah, I request you all to join us, please. You will find information about this on the Focus website. You will find this on Twitter. You will find it also on the sombath.org, www.sombath.org website. You can find all this information, and please share and join us and continue working with us to make sure that Sombath's legacy and the legacy of so many others who have been persecuted just for standing up for what is correct and what is right, that these legacies aren't forgotten. There is a publication, a small anthology of writings, which was put together by SEN, by Spirit in Education Movement. The
copies had been printed, but they were not available yet, so they'll be available at the FCCT event. But we did run off some copies, and they're outside for you to take, and the, you know, and the what is it called? The online address where you can download from is also there. So please help yourself to those. And then there is the book that Shwemi wrote, which is available for sale. We will be keeping some copies also in the Focus office, so if anybody would like them, you can also contact us and contact Shwemi directly, also for more copies. They'll be available in Thailand. And finally, there's coffee and snacks and some refreshments outside. We weren't able to arrange a proper lunch because we didn't know how many people would come. So it would be terrible to waste a lot of food. So we tried to put some substantial snacks. And in keeping with Sombath's values, the person who always caters snacks for us is somebody who works in the Food for Change movement in Thailand. And she's always sourcing locally, and always serves local products as part of all our catering needs. So thank you again. I don't know what I'm doing now. Thank you, Sir Vincent.
Yeah, big hands again for. I would also like to acknowledge all the staff members, particularly interpreters, always have to put up with a lot of hard work. Anyway, thank you, and thank you finally, Focus staff members, communication team, thank you so much.
And a very big thank you to Prachathai. Prachathai is live streaming this and has given us a recording for this. Thank you very much. Special thank you to the interpreter and all the technical team.
And this is finally, thank you all for coming and enjoy, continue conversation dialogues over the food prepared outside. So, see you again and bye now.